I pretended to be infertile for 10 years while my husband cheated, then revealed our 3 secret children at his funeral. My marriage started like a fairy tale, but it became the most elaborate deception I ever orchestrated. The man I married was charming, successful, and had this way of making me feel like the center of his universe. We moved into this beautiful house with a white picket fence, and I genuinely believed we were building something special together. Everything felt perfect until I discovered his first affair 3 years into our marriage. I found text messages on his phone while he was in the shower, and my world crumbled in an instant. The woman was someone from his work, and their conversations were intimate, romantic, and devastating. I confronted him that night, and he broke down crying, begging for forgiveness, promising it would never happen again. Like a fool, I believed him because I loved him so deeply and couldn't imagine my life without him. But the trust was broken, and I started paying attention to things I had previously ignored. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the way he guarded his phone like a precious secret. 6 months later, I caught him with another woman, and this time his apology felt hollow and rehearsed. I realized I was married to a serial cheater who would never change, no matter how many tears he shed or promises he made. That's when I started formulating my plan, though I didn't know it at the time. We had been trying for a baby for over a year, and I was getting desperate to start our family. When I finally got pregnant, I was overjoyed, but something held me back from telling him immediately. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was the fresh pain from his latest betrayal, but I decided to wait. The pregnancy test sat hidden in my jewelry box for weeks, while I watched him flirt with yet another woman at a dinner party. He was so obvious about it, practically undressing her with his eyes while I sat right there beside him. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to tell him about the baby, and I was going to let him believe I was infertile. The plan started small, but grew more elaborate as time passed. I began mentioning how disappointed I was that we couldn't conceive, how the doctors were running tests, how maybe there was something wrong with me. He seemed relieved, actually, which confirmed my suspicions that he didn't really want children anyway. He was too busy chasing other women to be bothered with the responsibility of fatherhood. I moved out to my sister's house across the country, telling him I needed space to deal with our fertility issues and that I was going to stay with family for a while. He barely protested, probably thrilled to have more freedom to pursue his affairs. I gave birth to our first child, a beautiful baby girl, and registered her birth certificate with only my name on it. The elaborate deception required careful planning and execution. I maintained the illusion through phone calls, emails, and occasional visits home where I would wear baggy clothes and maintain my story about struggling with infertility. I told him I was seeing specialists, undergoing treatments, and dealing with the emotional toll of our situation. He bought every word of it, probably because he was too distracted by his latest conquest to pay close attention. 2 years later, I had our second child, a son this time, and the pattern continued. I would visit home between pregnancies, maintaining the facade of a grieving woman who couldn't give her husband the family he deserved. The irony was delicious because he didn't deserve anything, especially not the 3 beautiful children he would never know existed. My sister became my accomplice in this elaborate scheme, helping me maintain the deception and providing a safe haven for me and the children. She understood why I was doing this, having witnessed firsthand how he treated me and how little respect he had for our marriage. Together, we created a parallel life where I could be a mother, while he remained blissfully unaware of his responsibilities. The third pregnancy was the most challenging to hide because by then I had been away for several years, only returning home for brief visits. I told him I was considering divorce, that the fertility issues were tearing us apart, and that maybe we weren't meant to be together. He actually seemed relieved by this conversation, which confirmed everything I already knew about his character. During these years, I discovered through mutual friends that his affairs had become increasingly brazen and numerous. He wasn't even trying to hide them anymore, introducing his girlfriends to people as his companion while claiming his wife was dealing with medical issues. The humiliation might have destroyed me if I hadn't been so focused on raising our children and planning my ultimate revelation. I documented everything during this time, keeping detailed records of his affairs, his finances, and his behavior. I hired a private investigator to gather evidence of his infidelity, not for divorce proceedings, but for something much more dramatic. I wanted to ensure that when the time came, I would have irrefutable proof of what kind of man he really was. The children grew up knowing about their father, but understanding that he was a complicated person who had made choices that hurt their mother. I never spoke badly about him in front of them, but I also never painted him as a hero. They were curious about him, especially as they got older and started asking more questions about why they lived so far away from him. 8 years into this deception, I received word that he had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition. The doctors gave him maybe 2 years to live, and suddenly my carefully crafted plan took on new urgency. I had always imagined revealing the truth when I was ready, but now I had a timeline that wasn't entirely under my control. I started making preparations for the eventual revelation, gathering photographs, videos, and documentation of the children's lives. I wanted to create a comprehensive record of everything he had missed, every milestone he had ignored, every moment he had sacrificed for his selfish pursuits. The children were old enough by then to understand the significance of what was happening. His health declined rapidly over the following months, and I began making more frequent trips home to maintain the illusion of a caring wife dealing with her husband's illness. It was during one of these visits that I discovered he had been having an affair with a woman barely older than our oldest child. The disgust I felt was overwhelming, but it also strengthened my resolve. The funeral was held at the church where we had gotten married, and hundreds of people attended to pay their respects. His family, friends, and colleagues all gathered to remember the man they thought they knew. I sat in the front row, dressed in black, playing the role of the grieving widow who had stood by her husband through his illness despite their personal struggles. When it came time for people to speak, I stood up and walked to the podium with a folder full of photographs and documents. The room fell silent as I began to speak, my voice clear and steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. I told them about the deception, about the affairs, about the 3 children who were waiting outside in the car with my sister. The gasps and murmurs that rippled through the crowd were audible, but I continued speaking, sharing story after story about the children he had never met. I showed photographs of their first steps, their first days of school, their birthday parties, their school plays. I read excerpts from their letters to the father they had never known, expressing their hopes and dreams and wondering why he had never visited them. The transformation in the room was palpable as people realized the extent of his betrayal and the elaborate nature of my deception. Some were angry, some were shocked, and others seemed almost impressed by the calculated nature of my revenge. His family members were devastated, realizing they had 3 grandchildren they had never known existed. After the service, I brought the children inside to meet their father's family for the first time. The resemblance was unmistakable, especially with our youngest, who had his distinctive chin and the same color eyes. His parents were overwhelmed with emotion, torn between grief for their son and joy at discovering these beautiful grandchildren. The aftermath was complicated and emotionally charged, with family members struggling to process the revelation and its implications. Some supported my decision, understanding the pain and betrayal that had driven me to such extremes. Others were angry about the deception, feeling that I had robbed them of years with their grandchildren and that my actions were cruel and vindictive. The legal implications were surprisingly minimal since I had been careful to document everything and had never claimed any financial support or benefits based on false pretenses. The children's birth certificates were legitimate, and I had raised them entirely on my own resources. The only real consequence was the emotional fallout from the revelation. In the weeks following the funeral, I received numerous phone calls and messages from people who had been there that day. Some were supportive, praising my strength and ingenuity in protecting myself and the children from a man who would have been a terrible father. Others were critical, arguing that I had denied the children the opportunity to know their father and that my actions were selfish and manipulative. The most unexpected outcome was the relationship that developed between the children and their paternal grandparents. Despite the shocking circumstances of their introduction, genuine bonds formed quickly, and the children gained an extended family they had never known existed. The grandparents were eager to make up for lost time and became an important part of their lives. Looking back now, I don't regret my decision, though I acknowledge it was extreme and unconventional. I protected my children from a man who would have been an unreliable and unfaithful father, and I gave them stability and love during their formative years. The revelation at his funeral was my way of ensuring that the truth about his character was known and that his legacy would include the consequences of his choices. The children, now teenagers, have mixed feelings about the situation, which I understand completely. They're grateful for the loving home I provided, but they sometimes wonder what their lives would have been like if they had known their father. We've had many conversations about it, and I've always been honest about my motivations and the complexity of the situation. The story has become somewhat legendary in our community, with people still talking about the funeral revelation years later. Some view me as a mastermind who executed the perfect revenge, while others see me as a woman who went too far in her quest for justice. I've learned to live with both perspectives, knowing that the truth is probably somewhere in between. What I know for certain is that I gave my children the best life I could under the circumstances, and I protected them from a man who would have caused them pain and disappointment. The deception was exhausting to maintain, but it was worth it to see them grow up confident and secure, knowing they were loved and valued. The funeral revelation was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, where the children could finally understand their full story and make their own decisions about their father's legacy. They had the opportunity to learn about him from other family members and form their own opinions about the man who had unknowingly missed their entire childhood. Sometimes I wonder if there was a better way to handle the situation, but I can't imagine any scenario where the outcome would have been significantly different. He was who he was, and I was who I was, and our paths were destined to diverge in a dramatic fashion. The funeral was simply the stage where the final act of our complicated relationship played out. The children are thriving now, having integrated their father's family into their lives while maintaining the strong foundation I built for them during those secretive years. They've learned valuable lessons about trust, integrity, and the consequences of our choices, lessons that will serve them well as they navigate their own relationships and challenges. My story isn't one of simple revenge or vindication, but rather a complex tale of survival, protection, and the lengths a mother will go to shield her children from harm. The deception was elaborate and sustained, but it was also necessary given the circumstances and the man I was dealing with. The funeral revelation was shocking, but it was also the truth, and sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon we have.